It was one of those afternoons that looked quiet but carried a strange kind of stillness in the air. The sun was soft, the sky fading into shades of gold, and the wind moved gently through the trees along the streets. A boy, 16 years old, walked out of the school gate with his backpack hanging loosely over one shoulder. He had stayed late for basketball practice and his shirt was slightly damp with sweat. But he didn't mind. He loved that tired feeling after a good game. He slipped in his earphones, letting music fill the space between him and the world. His sneakers hit the pavement in rhythm, every step steady and light. The road stretched ahead, familiar, peaceful. He had walked this same way home many times since moving here a few months ago. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood that smiled easily at strangers, but he'd learned to blend in, to keep his head down, to move quietly. Back when his family first arrived, he noticed small things. Neighbors who watched from their windows a little too long. Store clerks who followed him with their eyes when he browsed. His mother always told him not to take it personally, that people fear what they don't understand. She reminded him again and again, just be yourself, stay calm, and stay smart. He trusted her more than anyone. She worked hard, and he knew she carried a serious job, something she couldn't always talk about. He didn't know all the details, only that her work sometimes made her tired, and sometimes she came home late with that look, the one that said the world was heavy on her shoulders. But at home she was just his mom. She'd ask about his day, cook dinner, and make sure his uniform was ready for the next morning. Today he was excited because he had scored well in a math quiz. He couldn't wait to tell her. Maybe they'd stop for burgers later like they used to. He checked the time, almost 5:30. She'd probably still be at work, but he liked reaching home early enough to greet her when she came in. He crossed the small park near the main road, the one with old swings that creaked when the wind blew. He passed a group of little kids playing tag, their laughter echoing behind him. He smiled without even realizing it. It was a good day, or at least it had started that way. A few cars rolled past him, and then one slowed down. A white police cruiser. He barely noticed it at first. He kept walking, the music still playing softly in his ears. But then, the cruiser circled back. He caught the movement from the corner of his eye. The car stopped just a few steps ahead of him, and his music suddenly felt too loud. He pulled out one earbud, his heartbeat quickening for reasons he couldn't name. The car door opened. 2 officers stepped out. They weren't rushing, but there was something in their movement. Measured, cautious. "Hey, kid," one of them said, his voice flat but firm. "Come here a second." He froze, unsure if he had done anything wrong. He pointed to himself as if to ask, "Me?" "Yeah, you," the officer replied. "Come here." He stopped walking, but his legs felt heavy as he turned toward them. "Is something wrong?" he asked quietly. "Where you coming from?" the second officer asked, looking him up and down. "From school," he said, gesturing toward the direction he'd come from. "I just had practice." "Uh-huh," the first officer muttered, glancing at his partner. "You got ID on you?" He nodded and reached slowly into his backpack. He'd seen enough videos online to know never to move too fast. His hands were visible the whole time. He pulled out his school ID and handed it over. The officer studied it for a moment, then looked at him again. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir, just a few blocks that way." The second officer stepped closer. "You sure about that?" He blinked. "Yes. I walk this way every day." The 2 officers exchanged another glance. One of them pressed the radio on his shoulder and spoke softly into it. The boy didn't catch what was said, but it made his stomach twist. He tried to keep his breathing steady. People were walking by now, a few glancing at the scene before hurrying on. "Can you tell me what this is about?" he asked carefully. "Just a routine stop," the first officer replied. "There's been a report of a robbery nearby. You match the description." The words hit him like cold water. "A robbery?" he repeated. "I've just come from school. You can even call—" "Relax," the officer interrupted, raising a hand. "Just answering a few questions." The other one looked inside his backpack. "What's in here?" "Books, gym clothes, that's all," he said, his voice trembling slightly. The officer unzipped the bag anyway. He felt his face heat up, not from guilt, but from humiliation. People were looking now. A man across the street had stopped to record with his phone. "Sir, that's my school stuff," he said again, softer this time. The first officer looked up. "Why are you nervous then?" I'm not," he stammered. "I just don't understand why." "Keep your hands where I can see them," the officer snapped suddenly. He did, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every sound around him. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to speak or stay silent. He remembered his mother's voice in his head. Stay calm. Stay respectful. But it was hard to stay calm when every breath felt like a risk. The second officer looked inside his backpack again and found his basketball. He turned it over like it was something suspicious. "You play?" "Yes," the boy whispered. "School team." The man tossed the ball back roughly into the bag and zipped it shut. Minutes passed like hours. The boy stood still, his shoulders tense while the officers talked quietly near the car. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could feel the weight of their eyes on him. He thought about his mother, how she'd react if she saw this. She had told him stories about unfair situations, about how important it was to know your rights, but also how dangerous it could be to argue. He wished she were here now. She always knew how to make things right. The first officer came back toward him. "We might need you to wait a bit, all right? Can I call my mom?" he asked. "Not yet," the officer said quickly. "We'll let you know." He swallowed hard. His hands were still raised slightly. He could feel eyes on him from every direction now, people whispering, watching, but no one stepping forward. One little boy across the street asked his father, "What did he do?" The man pulled him away, saying nothing. The boy felt smaller by the second. Every ounce of confidence he had carried from school had drained away. The officers weren't yelling, but their tone carried something sharp beneath the surface. He looked down at his sneakers, then at his backpack lying open on the hood of the car. He thought about how strange it was, how quickly a normal day could turn into something that didn't feel real. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. The music from his earbuds had stopped long ago, but one earbud still dangled near his chest, silent now. After a while, one officer got a call on his radio. He turned away to answer it. The other stood beside the boy, arms crossed. "What grade you in?" the officer asked suddenly. "10th," the boy said quietly. The man nodded slowly. "You play ball for the school, huh?" "Yes, sir." You any good?" "I try to be." It was such a normal question, but the air still felt tense. He could tell the officer was trying to sound casual now, maybe realizing how things looked. But the damage was already done. The boy's trust, once whole, was cracked. The first officer came back. "All right," he said. "You can go. Just be careful walking around, okay?" He blinked. "That's it?" "Yeah," the man said, almost impatient. "You're good." He nodded, grabbed his backpack, and stepped back slowly. He wanted to run but forced himself not to. His legs felt weak, like they didn't belong to him. As he walked away, he could still feel their eyes on his back. He didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing his fear. When he turned the corner, the tension finally hit him all at once. He stopped, leaned against a fence, and tried to breathe. His hands were shaking. He told himself he was fine. Nothing happened. He was okay. But the truth was, something had happened. Something deep that couldn't be seen. That night when his mother came home, she would notice it right away. She always did. But for now, he just kept walking. The streetlights, flickering on one by one above him, guiding him home. The evening air was cool when he finally reached home. The quiet house felt different that day, heavier somehow. He dropped his backpack near the door and sat on the couch, still trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that clung to him. He turned on the TV, not to watch anything, but just to fill the silence. He couldn't stop replaying what had happened. The flashing lights, the tone in the officers' voices, the way people stared as if he had done something wrong. It was strange how a few minutes could change the way you saw the world. He used to think the police were people who helped, who showed up when you needed them. But now he wasn't so sure. His mother came home a little later than usual. He heard the sound of her keys at the door, the soft click of her heels on the floor. When she saw him sitting there, she smiled tiredly. "Hey, kid," she said gently. "You okay?" He nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But she noticed it right away. Her son was usually full of words when she came home, stories about his day, something funny from practice, or even random things about school. Tonight he was quiet. Too quiet. She put her bag down and looked at him carefully. "What happened?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp in that way that meant she already knew something was wrong. He hesitated. He didn't want to worry her, not after all the long hours she worked. But he also couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. "Some police officers stopped me on my way home," he said finally. Her eyes lifted instantly. "Stopped you? For what?" "They said I matched some description or something," he said. "They asked for my ID, looked through my bag. It was nothing, really. They let me go after a while." She didn't say anything at first. Her face was still, but her jaw tightened slightly. "Did they touch you?" "No, they didn't. They just searched my backpack." "Did they tell you what crime they thought you were connected to?" He shook his head. "They said it was a robbery nearby." She let out a long, controlled breath. "Did you get their names?" He frowned. "No, I didn't think of that." "That's okay," she said, sitting beside him. "Tell me everything that happened. From the moment they stopped you." So he told her. Every detail he could remember. The car circling back, the questions, how one of them checked his bag, how people started watching. He even told her about the man recording. He tried to stay calm while explaining, but halfway through his voice cracked a little. She didn't interrupt him. She just listened, her hand resting on his shoulder. When he finished, the silence hung between them. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything wrong." She looked at him, her eyes soft now. "I know you didn't," she said. "You did everything right. You stayed calm. You stayed respectful. That's all I could ever ask." He nodded, though he still felt small inside. She stood and walked to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. Her mind was racing. She'd seen things like this before, too many times. But it was different when it reached your own home, when it touched your own child. She had trained to handle high-pressure situations, but nothing compared to this kind of fear. The fear that came from knowing your child had been seen as a threat for no reason at all. When she returned to the living room, she sat beside him again. "Listen," she said softly, "I want you to know something. What happened today wasn't your fault. It was about them, their assumptions, their training, their biases. Not about you." He looked down at his hands. "I know, but it still feels wrong. Like I was doing something bad just by walking home." She nodded slowly. "I understand. It's not fair and it shouldn't happen. But you handled it the right way. You kept your head. You stayed alive. That's what matters most." He didn't say anything after that. They sat there for a while in silence, the TV still flickering in the background. Later that night, when he went to bed, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about those two officers, the way they looked at him like he was a puzzle that didn't fit. He thought about how fast everything had happened, how easily things could have gone worse. He couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if his mother had been there. Down the hall she was awake too. She sat at her desk, her badge glinting faintly under the lamplight. Her mind was restless. She replayed her son's story over and over, noting every small detail. The time, the location, the way they spoke to him. She took out a notepad and began writing it down. Years of training had taught her one thing: document everything. She planned to find out exactly which officers were on patrol in that area at that time. But she also knew she had to move carefully. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, making sure no other child went through what her son did. The next morning, the boy woke up early. He tried to shake off the heaviness in his chest and went through his usual routine. When he came to the kitchen, his mother was already dressed for work. She looked composed, though there was a seriousness in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. "You sleep okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. You sure?" "Yeah, good," she said. "You have a good day at school, all right? I'll see you this evening." She smiled, but he could tell her mind was elsewhere. At school, he tried to act normal. His friends laughed and talked about their game scores, teachers gave assignments, and the day went on as usual. But every time a police car passed outside the school gate, he felt his stomach tighten. He didn't tell his friends about what had happened. He didn't want to see that mix of pity and disbelief in their faces. Meanwhile, his mother's day was far from ordinary. She spent the morning quietly making calls, first to the local precinct, then to a few people she knew through her work. Being part of federal law enforcement had its advantages. She knew how to get information without drawing too much attention. By noon, she had what she needed: the names of the officers who had been assigned to that neighborhood the previous evening. She recognized one of them. She had met him once during a joint task briefing. The realization made her heart sink. That afternoon, she decided she would visit the precinct in person, not as an angry mother, but as a professional who knew exactly how systems worked. Back at home, the boy returned from school and sat by the window, waiting for her. The day felt long, heavier than usual. He tried distracting himself with homework but kept glancing at the clock. When she finally came home, she looked calm, too calm. Her silence said more than words ever could. He asked softly, "Did you find out anything?" She nodded. "Yes, I did. Are you going to talk to them?" "I already did," she said, setting her bag down. "We'll see where it goes from here." He wanted to ask more, but something in her expression told him not to. There was a quiet determination in her eyes, the kind that said she wasn't done yet. Dinner that night was quiet. They ate together, talking about small things, school, food, the news, but both knew there was something heavier sitting between them. After dinner, they went for a short walk outside, something they did whenever the day felt too full. The air was cool again, the streetlights glowing softly along the sidewalk. "I used to think this place felt safe," the boy said after a while. "It is safe," she replied gently, "but that doesn't mean it's fair." He looked up at her. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "Safety and fairness aren't always the same thing. Sometimes you can be safe but still treated unfairly. That's why it's important to speak up, not just for yourself but for others who can't." He nodded slowly. Her words made sense even if they felt heavy. As they reached their house again, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "I want you to remember this," she said softly. "When people see you, they'll make assumptions. You can't control that. But what you can control is how you carry yourself, how you react, and how you stay true to who you are." He looked at her, and for the first time that day, he smiled a little. "I'll try," he said. She smiled back. "That's all I ask." That night, the house was peaceful again. But beneath the calm, something had shifted. A quiet strength, a shared understanding between mother and son. The world around them might not change overnight, but they both knew one thing for sure. If anything like that ever happened again, it wouldn't end the same way, because next time, she'd be there, and things would be very different. The next morning started like any other. The boy was getting ready for school, putting his books in his backpack, tying his shoes, and checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. But inside, he still felt a little different. Something about the previous days had changed the way he looked at everything. The quiet streets, the familiar corners, even the sound of cars driving by. His mother was already up, sipping coffee and reading a file from work. She looked calm as always, but her eyes carried that sharp focus that meant she had a plan. When he grabbed his bag and said goodbye, she looked up and smiled softly. "Be careful today, okay?" she said. "I will," he answered. "See you later." As he walked to school, he noticed the same patrol car parked across the street from the park. His steps slowed for just a moment. He wasn't sure if it was the same one from before, but his chest tightened anyway. The sound of his sneakers on the pavement echoed louder than usual, and he kept his eyes straight ahead. It wasn't that he was afraid. He just didn't want to be noticed again. He had learned how quickly attention could turn into trouble. At school, the day passed quietly. He focused on his classes, tried to laugh when his friends joked, and pushed everything else to the back of his mind. But at lunch, when he glanced at his phone, he saw something that made his stomach twist. A short video was circulating on social media. Someone had recorded the police stop. The clip wasn't long, but it showed him standing on the sidewalk while officers questioned him. The caption read, "Another teen stopped for no reason." He felt heat rush to his face. People at school were already sharing it, whispering, tagging, commenting. He didn't know whether to feel embarrassed, angry, or scared. When he got home that day, his mother was already there. She looked up when he walked in, her expression serious. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's all over the internet." She sighed and rubbed her temples. "I figured this might happen. Someone was filming that day." He dropped his bag onto the couch. "What do we do now?" "We stay calm," she said simply. "That video might help. It shows what really happened. But everyone at school saw it," he said. "They keep asking questions. Some think I did something wrong. Others just look at me differently." She stood and walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't do anything wrong. Don't ever forget that. People will talk, but the truth will speak louder." He nodded, but the words didn't erase the knot in his chest. Later that evening, as the sun went down, she made a few phone calls, one to her supervisor, one to the local precinct. She spoke calmly, her voice steady and professional. The boy listened from the hallway, catching pieces of her sentences. Civil rights concern, incident report, body camera review. When she hung up, she looked at him and said, "Tomorrow I'm going to talk to them directly." He frowned. "Talk to who?" "The officers involved," she said. "It's time they know who they stopped that day." He didn't know what to say. He trusted her completely, but part of him worried. "Will that make things worse?" "No," she said softly. "It'll make things clear." The next afternoon after school, she picked him up instead of letting him walk home. He got into the car, surprised to see her still in her work suit. Dark blazer, badge clipped to her belt, eyes focused. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To the precinct," she said, starting the car. He didn't argue. The drive was quiet except for the sound of the turn signals and the steady hum of the engine. When they arrived, she parked in front of the building and turned to him. "You don't have to say anything," she told him gently. "Just stay by me." He nodded, his heart beating fast. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paperwork. Officers moved around, some nodding politely when they saw her badge. She walked with quiet confidence, every step measured and sure. They stopped at the front desk, where she introduced herself and asked to see the captain. The receptionist checked the computer and quickly made a call. Within minutes, a tall officer appeared, one of the same men who had stopped her son days ago. His face changed the moment he saw them. "Oh," he said, straightening his posture. "I didn't realize." She held up a hand. "You didn't realize a lot of things, apparently," she said, her voice calm but sharp. The boy stood silently beside her, watching. He had never seen her like this before. There was no anger in her tone, just authority, the kind that made everyone in the room stop and listen. "Let's talk privately," she said. They moved into a small office at the back. She sat across from the two officers who had stopped her son. The captain joined them a few minutes later. Her voice remained steady as she began. "On the evening of Tuesday around 5:30, my son was stopped while walking home from school. You claimed he matched a suspect description. You searched his bag without consent. You did not read any rights, nor did you provide any specific reasoning beyond a vague statement." The room was silent. The boy glanced at the officers. One of them looked down at his hands. "I've reviewed your patrol log," she continued. "There was no active robbery call within that time frame matching his description. That means this was an unnecessary stop. And now, thanks to social media, it's public." The captain shifted uncomfortably. "Agent, I understand your concern. I can assure you, I don't want assurances," she interrupted quietly. "I want accountability. My son was humiliated in front of his community because your officers failed to verify basic information before approaching him." The boy could feel the tension in the air, but he also felt something else, pride. His mother wasn't yelling or making a scene. She was standing her ground, calmly, powerfully, the way only someone certain of the truth could. After a long silence, one of the officers finally spoke. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any harm. We were responding to a possible call. Maybe there was confusion." "Maybe," she said. "But confusion doesn't excuse negligence." The captain nodded slowly. "We'll review the footage and the call records. If there was any misconduct, we'll handle it internally. I'll be following up," she said, standing. "You'll have my report by morning." As they left the building, the boy exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. The air outside felt lighter somehow. "Mom," he said quietly as they walked to the car. "You were amazing." She smiled faintly. "It's not about that. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again, to you or anyone else." That night, when they got home, she printed out her report and added it to a file on her desk. It was thick now, filled with notes, screenshots, and copies of every call she'd made. She didn't plan to let this fade away quietly. Meanwhile, the boy scrolled through his phone and saw the same video again, but this time, the comments were different. People were starting to defend him. Someone had posted an update saying the teen's mother was an FBI agent who had confronted the officers. The tone had shifted. The same people who had once whispered now admired the courage behind the story. He smiled a little. Maybe something good could come from it after all. Over the next few days, things changed. The local news picked up the story, though they kept their names private. It sparked conversations about bias, about the way young people were treated, and about what accountability really meant. The boy noticed people at school treating him differently now, not out of pity, but respect. Some even thanked him for sharing what happened. He didn't see himself as brave, but maybe that's what bravery looked like, standing still when the world expected you to fall. At home, life slowly went back to normal. They laughed again at dinner, watched movies, and talked about ordinary things. But there was a quiet understanding between them now, an invisible bond that came from surviving something unfair and coming out stronger. One evening, his mother sat beside him on the porch as the sky turned orange with sunset. She looked at him thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "sometimes life gives you moments you don't ask for just to show you who you really are." He looked at her. "And who am I?" She smiled. "You're stronger than you think." He leaned back against the steps, watching the last bit of sunlight fade. For the first time in days, he felt truly calm. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with her by his side, he believed he could handle whatever came next. The next few weeks passed quietly, but the weight of everything that had happened still lingered in the air. The boy went to school, came home, did his homework, and tried to move on. Outwardly, life looked normal again. But sometimes, when he walked down the same street where the police had stopped him, a small shiver would still crawl up his spine. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like a memory that refused to fade. His mother, on the other hand, was far from done. She was patient and methodical. Each evening after work, she'd review papers, emails, and reports. She wanted to make sure the investigation into the officers' behavior was handled properly, not because she wanted to punish them, but because she wanted change, real, lasting change. She knew how the system worked. She also knew that silence was often what allowed injustice to continue. So she refused to stay quiet. One morning, she received an official notice from the precinct. The two officers had been temporarily suspended pending review. It was a small victory, but she didn't celebrate. She knew how quickly cases like this could disappear behind closed doors. That afternoon, she picked her son up from school. He slid into the passenger seat and noticed the folder on the dashboard with police department markings. "Is that about the case?" he asked. She nodded. "They've started an internal review." He hesitated. "Does that mean they're in trouble?" "It means they're being held accountable," she said. "There's a difference." He nodded quietly, staring out the window as the car rolled past familiar streets. "Do you think it'll really change anything?" She took a deep breath. "Maybe not everything, but maybe enough." The next few days were calmer. The noise on social media began to fade, the comments slowed, and life seemed to settle again. But one evening, as they sat down for dinner, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man standing there, an older gentleman in plain clothes holding a notepad. He introduced himself as a community officer working with the department's outreach program. He said he wanted to speak about the recent incident. She invited him in. They sat in the living room as the boy listened quietly from the hallway. The officer spoke carefully, explaining that the department was working to improve communication with the community. He said they were implementing new training sessions to help officers better handle interactions with youth. "I just wanted to say," the man continued, "what happened shouldn't have happened, and I'm sorry it did." Her expression softened slightly, though her voice remained steady. "Apologies are a start," she said. "But what matters is what comes next." The officer nodded. That's exactly why I'm here. We'd like to invite both of you to a community meeting next week. Parents, officers, students, everyone will be there. We're trying to start an open conversation. She agreed to attend. When he left, the boy stepped out. You're really going to go? He asked. Yes, she said, because silence changes nothing. The following week, the meeting took place at the local community center. The room was filled with people, some angry, some curious, some just there to listen. The air was heavy with unspoken tension. The boy sat beside his mother in the front row. He recognized a few faces from the day of the incident. Neighbors, classmates, even the man who had filmed the video. On the stage, a few officers stood awkwardly near a table, clearly uncomfortable. When the meeting began, the department representative thanked everyone for coming and talked about the importance of rebuilding trust. Then, one by one, community members stood up to share their stories. Some spoke calmly, others through tears. When it was his mother's turn, she stood slowly and faced the crowd. Her voice carried quiet power. My son was stopped because he fit a description, she began. A vague, undefined description that could have been applied to anyone who looked like him. That moment might have lasted only minutes, but the fear it created, that lasts much longer. The room was silent as she spoke. She continued. I work in law enforcement myself. I believe in justice, in structure, and the importance of those who protect and serve. But I also believe in accountability. Wearing a badge doesn't make you above the people you serve. It makes you responsible to them. The boy watched as his mother spoke with calm strength. He had never been more proud. When she finished, people clapped, not the loud, dramatic kind of applause, but the quiet, respectful kind that comes from agreement. After the meeting, several people approached them, parents who thanked her, teachers who offered support, and even a few officers who said they wanted to do better. It was a strange mix of emotions. For the first time since that afternoon, the boy felt something like hope. As they left the building, the sky was clear, the air cool. The boy walked a little taller beside her. Do you think it'll actually change things? He asked again. She smiled faintly. Change takes time, but every step counts. A few days later, she received a call from the precinct. The review had concluded. The officers who had stopped her son were found in violation of procedure. They would face mandatory retraining and suspension without pay. It wasn't a big headline. It didn't make the news, but for her it was enough. That evening they sat on the porch together watching the sun dip behind the trees. The world looked peaceful again, at least for the moment. Mom, he said after a long silence, I don't think I'll ever forget that day. You shouldn't, she said softly. It's part of your story now. But what matters is what you do with it. He thought for a moment. Maybe I'll talk about it one day. Like in school or something. Maybe someone else can learn from it. She smiled, pride glinting in her eyes. That's the best thing you could do. Weeks passed and life slowly returned to rhythm. He focused on school and basketball again, but something inside him had grown. A sense of awareness, of quiet confidence. He was more observant now, more thoughtful about the world around him. One afternoon, he walked home from school just like before. The same streets, the same trees, the same park. But this time, when a patrol car passed, he didn't tense up. Instead, he looked straight ahead, calm and steady. He knew who he was, and no one could make him feel smaller again. When he reached home, his mother was watering the plants outside. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. How was your day? She asked. Good, he said, smiling back. Really good. She nodded, content. That's all I want to hear. That weekend, they went to visit his grandparents in the city. It had been months since they'd gone, and it felt nice to be surrounded by laughter and food and warmth. His grandparents listened carefully as his mother explained what had happened. They shook their heads, upset but proud. You raised him well, his grandmother said, looking at him with kind eyes. You kept your calm, and that's something not everyone can do. He smiled shyly. I just did what Mom always told me. His grandfather chuckled. Smart boy. Always listen to your mother. They all laughed, the kind of laugh that comes when the storm has finally passed. Later that night, as they drove home, the city lights shimmered through the car windows. The boy leaned back, looking out at the skyline. His mother glanced at him and said, You know, I think you taught me something too. He turned to her, curious. Me? What could I teach you? She smiled. That courage doesn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes it just means standing still and holding your ground. He thought about that for a while, and it stayed with him long after. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. There were still moments when he felt cautious, moments when the world reminded him of how unfair it could be. But there were also moments of kindness. Neighbors who smiled more, teachers who checked in, people who looked at him with understanding instead of judgment. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And something was enough to begin again. The boy had learned that change doesn't come in big waves. It comes in small steps, in quiet voices, in people who refuse to look away. And sometimes it starts with one moment, one unfair encounter that turns into a lesson, one act of courage that ripples through a community. As he drifted to sleep that night, he thought about how far they had come since that day. The fear had turned into strength. The silence had turned into conversation. And through it all, his mother had been there, not just as his protector, but as his example of what it meant to stand firm in the face of injustice. The world was still imperfect, but now he believed it could change, one truth at a time. It had been almost 6 months since that day on the street. The seasons had changed. The leaves that once burned red and orange were now gone, and a soft chill filled the air. Life in many ways had returned to normal, but underneath the calm surface something deeper had shifted, in both the boy and his mother. He had grown quieter, but not out of fear. It was a kind of thoughtful quietness, the kind that comes after you've seen something that changes the way you look at the world. His mother noticed it too. She didn't press him to talk about it anymore. Instead, she gave him space, the kind of silence that allows a person to heal in their own time. One evening, while she was sorting through some files in her home office, she heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she said. Looking up, he stepped in holding a folder. I wanted to show you something." She smiled and set her papers aside. "What is it?" He opened the folder and pulled out a few sheets of paper, neatly typed. "It's an essay I wrote for school. The topic was about something that changed your perspective. I wrote about that day." She froze for a second. He hadn't spoken about it for months. Gently, she reached out for the pages. "Do you want me to read it now?" she asked softly. He nodded. She began reading. His words were simple but powerful. He wrote about the moment he realized how easily a misunderstanding could turn into danger, how he had felt helpless, and how it made him question things he'd always taken for granted. But he also wrote about her, how she had arrived calm yet fierce, and how that moment had shown him what strength really looked like. By the time she reached the last page, her eyes were wet. She smiled at him through the blur. "This is beautiful," she said. "I'm proud of you." He shrugged shyly, a small grin tugging at his lips. "My teacher said they might print it in the school paper." Her heart swelled. "That's amazing. You're turning something painful into something meaningful." He hesitated, then said, "I just want people to understand, not to be angry, just to understand." She nodded, realizing in that moment that her son was growing into someone strong, someone who saw the world clearly, yet still believed in goodness. A few days later, the essay was published in the school newsletter. It spread quickly, shared among students and even teachers. Some came up to him in the hallway to say how much it moved them. Others admitted they hadn't realized things like that could happen to someone they knew. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He felt heard. One morning as he walked into school, the principal stopped him near the entrance. "I read your essay," the principal said warmly. "You've started something important. We're planning a student forum next month about equality and awareness. I'd like you to speak there." He blinked, surprised. "Me? Speak in front of everyone?" "Yes," the principal said. "You have something worth sharing." He agreed, though a small knot of nervousness formed in his stomach. Speaking to his classmates was one thing. Speaking to a whole auditorium full of people was something else entirely. When he told his mother that night, she smiled. "I know you're nervous, but remember, courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you move forward anyway." He nodded slowly. The day of the forum arrived a few weeks later. The gym was packed, students, teachers, even a few local reporters. The principal introduced the event, speaking briefly about unity and understanding. Then he called the boy's name. As he stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. For a moment, he felt the same flutter of fear he'd felt that day months ago, that strange mix of tension and uncertainty. But then he looked up and saw his mother sitting near the back, her eyes steady on him, her small nod telling him she believed in him. He took a deep breath and began. He didn't give a long speech. He just spoke honestly, about what happened, how it made him feel, and what he learned from it. He talked about fear, but also about understanding, about how he didn't want people to hate, but to think, to listen, to see beyond the surface. He said, "I used to think the world was either good or bad. But now I know it's people who make the difference. The choices we make, that's what matters." When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds, and then applause began, slow at first, then louder. Some students even stood up. He felt his chest tighten, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something else, relief, pride, maybe even hope. Afterwards, several teachers came up to him, thanking him for his words. A few students, even ones he didn't know well, shook his hand. One of them said quietly, "Thanks for saying what a lot of us feel but can't explain." That evening, his mother took him out for dinner to celebrate. They didn't talk much about the speech. They just enjoyed their food, the quiet music, and the simple feeling of peace that had been missing for so long. As they were leaving the restaurant, a man approached them near the door. He looked familiar, one of the community officers who had attended the earlier meeting months ago. "I just wanted to say," the man said to the boy, "your speech today, it meant something. I showed it to a few of the guys at the station. We've been having conversations about it." Its opening eyes, the boy smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir." When the man walked away, his mother turned to him. "You see what you did? You started something." He didn't know what to say. He just nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting. Days turned into weeks again. Life was steady, simple, full of quiet moments that felt like healing. Sometimes the memory of that day still came back. Flashes of blue lights, the sound of sharp voices, the cold rush of fear. But now those memories didn't control him. They had become part of a bigger story, one he had taken back into his own hands. One afternoon, he and his mother were sitting in the living room. The sun was streaming through the window, catching the dust in the air. She was reading a book and he was sketching in his notebook. After a long pause, he said, "You know, Mom, I think I want to study law someday." She looked up, surprised but smiling. "Law?" He nodded. "Yeah, maybe I can help make things better. Even if it's just a little." Her eyes softened. "That would make me very proud." He looked down at his notebook, tracing a line with his pencil. "You always told me to stand up for what's right. I think this is how I want to do it." She closed her book and said, "Then you'll be great at it." The next few years weren't always easy. There were challenges, exams, moments of self-doubt, and the occasional reminder of how complicated the world could be. But he kept going, fueled by a quiet determination that came from that single day. The day that had once filled him with fear but had now given him purpose. His mother watched him grow with pride and gratitude. Sometimes when she came home from work, she'd see him at the kitchen table, books open, papers spread out, a look of focus on his face. She never interrupted. She'd just smile, knowing that everything they had gone through had led to this, a new beginning. Years later, when he graduated from college, she was in the front row. As he walked across the stage, diploma in hand, their eyes met for a moment. She didn't need to say anything. Her smile said it all. After the ceremony, as they stood outside surrounded by friends and family, she hugged him tightly. "You did it," she whispered. He hugged her back. "We did it." The story that began with fear had ended with hope. Not a loud, dramatic kind of hope, but the steady, lasting kind that grows quietly over time. The kind that reminds you that even in the hardest moments, love and strength can rewrite what once seemed unchangeable. And in that calm, sunlit afternoon as they stood side by side, both of them knew something simple and true. What had once been a story of pain had become a story of courage, and a reminder that no matter what the world brings, the bond between a mother and her child can turn fear into strength and injustice into purpose.